What is going on, gun fighters? Saddle up for Gunfighter Life, where we talk about guns, gunfighting, tactics, use of force, ammunition, ballistics, that whole genre of life, the right way, with Almighty God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. While you're listening to the bio, don't forget to scroll down to a tactical assault, locate, close with, and destroy that subscribe button. Punch those stars. Leave a review, a comment, share it with somebody you think will appreciate it. I appreciate you. With that, the bio, and then a little bit of a preamble about the philosophy behind the day's subject. 22 Magnum, Suburban, Stealth, Death Ray, question mark. My thoughts on the 22 Magnum in general, those kind of things. So, stay tuned. I'll roll into a quick abbreviated bio and then into the main topic. First and foremost, I am a Christian. I don't apologize for that. God is number one in my life. I grew up hunting and fishing in the backwoods of the southeastern United States at a very early age. Some of my earliest memories are with firearms. I joined the Marine Corps at 17, did a couple of combat tours in Iraq. By God's grace, He got me through that safely. After that, I served as an instructor, an urban warfare instructor and a desert warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps. I also served with the LAPD, both full-time as a sworn police officer and some more specialized assignments, as well as serving in the U.S. Army, full-time and part-time National Guard. I've been a FBI firearms instructor, still am an FBI firearms instructor, have been for a lot of years, also NRA certified and some other three-letter government agency certified. I've been a private contractor for a three-letter government agency I won't specify. I've been the commander of a tactical team in a large metropolitan area. By God's grace, He got me through all that in one piece, not because I'm better, but because He chose to have grace and mercy on me. I've been a professional hunter and guide. Professionally hunted things like buffalo and elk. Not many people today can say they've done that, but I'm blessed to be able to say that I have. I've hunted everything from white-tailed deer on the East Coast to mule deer on the West Coast to gray squirrel on the East Coast to prairie dog on the West Coast, and elk and bear and wolf, and slain all manner of beast. A state rifle and pistol champion a few times over in a few different disciplines. Now those experiences, it's not because I'm bigger or badder, certainly not bigger. In fact, I met one of the patrons in real life and he said something to the effect of, "I thought you'd be bigger." Reminded me of that William Wallace movie where he's like, "Oh yeah, if William Wallace were here, he'd shoot lightning bolts out of his rear end." Well, I'm not William Wallace, but I am the person that did all those things in the bio. But not because I'm bigger or badder. I don't think that I survived when many other young, good men did not. I give all the glory and all the credit to God, all the talents and experiences that He's given me and the things that He's let me live through. I hope to use them to glorify God and to help you today. So if I boast in anything, it's not in my strength. It's in that God had mercy on me and saved me because He had a purpose for me. And hopefully I can use those talent, skills, and abilities to serve you today. What is the dope on 22 Magnum? Is it a Suburban Death Ray? Stealthy, lethal, affordable, quiet? Is it like a hidden gem in urban survival? Is it a worthless pea shooter? Suitable for prepubescent boys and killing miniature poodles? Obviously, the truth is somewhere in the middle. So, let's dive into that. First, let us look into some ballistics. Let's look at the numbers, the physics. Obviously, we have to compare it to some things. The obvious thing to compare it to, I think, at least to start, is 22 long rifle. And for me, when I think of like 22 long rifle, to me the standard for good quality ammunition, not just plinking ammunition, but like I'm going to do something with this ammunition. I'm going to hunt with it. It's maybe for defense. Calm down on this. I'm not recommending that you carry a 22 long rifle for defense. I'm just saying, if I'm thinking of that, my number one recommendation for most guns is going to be CCI Mini Mag. And you may differ from that. You may find that that doesn't work in your gun, but it's kind of what I would start with. So let's look at the ballistics of CCI Mini Mag 22 long rifle. I'm going to stick with the 40 grain, although I usually run a 36 grain hollow point because they also make a 40 grain load for 22 Magnum. So let's look at that. CCI Mini Mag, 40 grain at 1235. And there's a lot of different loads, but that's a pretty standard good load. 40 grains at 1235. And even if it's not your favorite, even if that's Rocky Road and you like cookies and cream, right? I don't care. It's a decent load. Now, if we look at the Maxi Mag, and the Maxi Mag, as you might imagine, is the 22 Magnum CCI load. That's 40 grain at 1875. So we're going from 12 and some change to 18 and some change. That is not a marginal gain. That is not like going from, a standard load 22 to a hot loaded 22 to a hyper velocity 22 long rifle. It is substantially more powerful. So let us agree there that it is substantially more powerful than 22 long rifle. It is an appreciable gain in both velocity for a similar grain weight bullet and energy. Energy in foot-pounds is 312. Energy for the 22 long rifle is 127. 127 versus 312. I'd call that an appreciable gain, at least in potential performance, because more energy is not always better, and it does not always translate into more effectiveness on target. But it has definitely more foot-pounds of energy because that's how math works. Force equals mass times velocity squared. So energy, at least foot-pounds wise, tends to favor faster cartridges by quite a bit. If you use that formula, if you think that is relevant on actual living targets, which is debatable, but let's just run with it. You double the weight of a projectile, you double its energy. If you double the velocity, you square the energy. So, I'm just saying, it at least has the potential to have far more ballistic effect. Whether it does or not is going to depend on a lot of factors. And I should mention, both of those came from CCI website, and those are going to be optimistic ballistics, and those are rifle ballistics, not handgun ballistics. So it is an appreciable gain. It is a different ballpark. It's maybe even the same sport, but it's like going from, let's say, pee-wee football to high school football, right? It's a different amount of energy knocking around on the field. Now let's look at it ballistically compared to 223. Now, if we look at like the OG plain Briars vanilla load, we look at XM 193 out of a 20-inch barrel, 55 grain bullet. And now we're not even comparing, we're not even playing the same sport because we're bumping up to a 55 grain from a 40 grain, which is an appreciable gain in mass. And we're probably not talking about a copper washed soft piece of lead. We're talking about some bullet technology, better ballistic coefficient, better ogive, cantilures, proper copper jacketing, all that stuff. We're talking about a 55 grain bullet, and we're talking at 30 to 40 feet per second. Now the other ones were CCI, that's their manufacturer, and this one's going to be from Federal, but to be fair, they're all owned by one big giant conglomerate. So I think we can pretty much call that apples to apples comparison. If we look at their data, specs, 223 Remington, 55 grain, 3240 feet per second. And if we look at energy, we're looking at 1282. We're not playing the same sport anywhere. It's not like going from Pee Wee football to high school football to, pro NFL. We are talking about smashing monster trucks together at this point. If you're talking about energy gain, we were talking about 127 versus 300 and something. Now we're talking 1282. Right? It's not even close. So if you think in your head, if you're not really a ballistics nerd and you think, well, 22 Magnum is kind of like a really hot 22 long rifle. Well, no, it's not. It's its own thing. And if you're thinking it's like a little bit less powerful 223, no, it is not even close. Like, they are 22 caliber, and that's pretty much all they share in common. That's it. They are not playing the same. Just like you wouldn't take a 7-year-old and throw him in there to play high school football and say, oh, it's pretty much fair. You wouldn't take a high school football guy, have him try and tackle a monster truck head on, charging each other. These are not fair comparisons. They are not. I have to give you like a breakdown to give you energy numbers and velocities. But again, if you think that 22 Magnum is like a hot 22 long rifle, it is not. It is appreciably more powerful than that. And if you think that it's kind of like a lesser rimfire 223, it is not. It is not even close in any measurable way. Now, I'm not going to list a bunch of other loads. I don't want to list a bunch of other loads in those other two calibers because I don't want to get even further down a rabbit hole. And I realize looking at the time on this episode, it's already going to be a long episode because I'm just trying to give you an idea of what the 22 Magnum is and what it is not before you even get started into use. But I think there's a lot of misconception that I wanted to clear up around that. So with that foundation laid, let's build on it. Now, maybe I should have done this in the beginning, but I'm going to do it now. This was sparked by a patron. So if you appreciate that and you appreciate the show and not taking bribes and me not telling you to buy this cool new gun, look at this company just came out with a cool new lever action, buy it now or you're going to miss out. If you appreciate an honest, fair perspective, the Patreon step up and support this show. If you want to do that, consider becoming a patron. With that, this was sparked by a question asked by a patron. Now, patrons get special insider-only episodes that you're just not going to get. He was responding to one of those episodes that you, unless you're a patron, are not going to hear. But I will read you his question, which sparked thinking about and thinking this was deserving of its own episode. So you have a lot to thank the patrons for, as do I. Thank you. And thank you, Delta, for this question. What are your thoughts on 22 Mag? I looked back and I didn't see an episode on it. I have some friends that carry 22 Mag lever for hog hunting. I was thinking of it for a truck gun. This past Sunday, I was driving early in the morning. I live in what you would call a people hive, a town of 60,000. Ugh. Here's the thing, just on a brief aside, if you would not call that a people hive, look at the population of London in, let's say, the Middle Ages. I think because we have so many people today that we don't think of that as a people hive. That is a giant metropolitan area throughout most of human history. So I would call it a people hive. I would call it a metropolis. A town of about 60,000. It was rural and still has a rural culture, but in the past 7 years or so, it has been marked for invasion by California migrants. Has at least doubled in size anyways. Someone had hit a deer and it wasn't dead. Was lame but looking around. Just off the side of the road in town. I didn't have a rifle in the truck. Brief aside, come on Delta, what are you doing? So I called the sheriff. But I was thinking, this is a truck gun moment. Yes, that and many others. Probably the first I have encountered. What would be useful here? I would probably get arrested for discharging a 308 in town. A 22 would do it. But would I want to just have a 22 long rifle in the truck? Then I remembered 22 mag. Seems like a good choice. Okay, so that's what got me thinking about this. I'm not going to read you my response to him, but I did respond to him, so he doesn't have to wait for this, even though patrons are going to get this episode early and ad-free long before you ever hear it. But I'll go into it here on the audio for everybody and expound on it. 22 Magnum. For small game hunting, I don't like it. I'm not crazy about it. And here's why. If I'm hunting small game to eat or for my dog to eat, again, 22 Magnum is not just like a little bit hotter 22. It is way hotter, which means it can do a lot of damage. It can do a lot of damage on small game, like a squirrel or a quail or a dove. We're talking survival scenarios. Like if we're talking survival scenarios and I'm shooting something to eat it, we have in this America, I think, bigger is always better, more is always better. Gotta have more, gotta supersize it. But no, for small game hunting, if I'm shooting something to eat it, I don't want to blow it apart. In fact, a lot of times when I'm squirrel hunting, I would advise you not to use hollow points, because even like a CCI mini mag with hollow points, if you hit those front shoulders, you can blow a big chunk of that squirrel away. For small game hunting that I'm going to eat, and I follow Leviticus 11, I follow the Bible. I believe the whole Bible is true and applicable. That said, my dog does eat quite a bit of game, and I love my dog. My dog's well over 100 pounds of Rhodesian Ridgeback hunter. I teach him to hunt, I teach him to scavenge, I teach him to, take advantage of food opportunities when they're available. And I will certainly feed him that stuff. But even there, right, for small game hunting, and I'm considering small game anything anything cottontail size rabbit and down, I don't want a 22 Magnum for that at all, if my goal is to eat it. Now, if we're talking varmint hunting, for sure, 22 mag is better than 22 long rifle. 22 Magnum is, if you're talking about jackrabbit, right, which is considerably, jackrabbit is not like a little bit bigger cottontail. They are way, way bigger than a cottontail. And a lot of times jackrabbits are considered a nuisance. You can hunt them without a hunting license. You can hunt them all year round in some states. They're a great training tool for learning how to hunt other things. And again, I would consider them dog food. In fact, I shot one once and somebody else was going to eat one. And you could literally see the bot flies, which are these giant, disgusting maggots. There's a reason they're not food. Crawling around under the skin. And I was like, you're not eating that. And I've eaten some nasty stuff in my life. But no, not food. But if you're just trying to shoot jackrabbit and blow up jackrabbit, I don't want anything to suffer. If it's not for consumption, right, then 22 mag is going to be better for jackrabbits than 22 long rifle. If you're talking about moving up into like fox at longer ranges, because 22 long rifle is fine for fox at closer ranges. If you're talking about coyote, not that I wouldn't shoot a coyote with a 22 long rifle, but I'd feel much more comfortable shooting coyote with 22 Magnum. And up into larger game. Now, I have to talk about this because it's a real thing. Poaching. We're talking about poaching. And I don't advise that in normal times. I'm not going to say that I'm not familiar with it. I grew up poor in the South. We put food on the table. Let me just put it that way. I'm not even aware that I knew what fishing game laws were. But 22 Magnum is a favorite of poachers. If you do a cost-benefit analysis, it's cheap. If you're hunting on somebody else's land and you want to be quiet and you want to do it cheaply, you shoot a deer in the head with a 22 Magnum. Does it always work? No, it does not always work. It does not always kill a deer. But it does it enough, quietly enough, that it's a favorite among poachers. So, and a lot of those poachers who would call themselves country boys, I would call them suburban boys because they live in suburbs. They live in places where fields are planted and plowed, where people have mowed grass. To me, that's a suburb. So for suburban poaching, it's kind of the choice. And I'm not going to argue with that. if that's what you are doing, whether legally or illegally, in that kind of environment, like let's say where you are, there's no law against discharging a firearm, but you just don't want to use more than you have to. If you're having a problem with raccoons or fox getting in the hen house, 22 mag's not a bad choice. It's, again, we're talking varmint round. We're talking a varmint round. I think it's better than 22 long rifle for that. Not that long ago, my Rhodesian Ridgeback treed a coon that was near the house. It was late at night, and I just didn't want to be loud. So I shot it in the body with 22. These were actually 22 shorts because I wanted to be quiet. It was very quiet. My wife, who was standing right inside, said she didn't hear anything. Shot it in the body with 22 shorts. Wounded it pretty good, but it was still up in the tree. So the next shot, I was like, well, I know what to do. I'll shoot it in the face. Well, I shot this raccoon in the head, and it knocked it out of the tree, and it fell down and took off running. Because I can only surmise that the 22 short failed to penetrate the skull. The skull on a raccoon can be pretty robust. Now, if I'd have gone back and done that again, what I should have done was probably just put another round or two in the body. Headshots are not always best. 22 Magnum, I'm pretty confident that a 22 Magnum, a pretty vanilla load, would have gone through the skull of a big boar coon. But it would have been louder. Into the loudness thing later. So for varmint hunting, yeah, I think it's a little bit better. Can you kill a deer by shooting with a 22 long rifle? Yes, plenty of people have. But if I was relying on one or the other to put meat on the table, and I was shooting deer in the head, there's a lot more chance that 22 Magnum is going to penetrate a skull of a deer more often than a 22 long rifle. Not that both won't kill a deer, but if I'm choosing one or the other, and I don't know, other than poaching, I don't know why that I would. Yeah, I would say the 22 Magnum is better for that. Now I'll get into, I once had a 22 Magnum, and I no longer do. And here's why. 22 Magnum for varmint hunting. Okay. One of my favorite varmints to hunt is, maybe the more acceptable term would be ground squirrels. Some places they call them prairie dogs, some places they call them whistle pigs, some places call them whatever exact species of disgusting plague-carrying short-tailed ground squirrel that they are. But they can do a lot of damage to crops. They can do a lot of damage to an environment, do a lot of damage to a farmer's field, to a rancher's alfalfa. One thing if they're in their own native environment out on native prairie and they have to compete in their native environment. It's another thing if farmers are trying to grow food for you and these fat little disgusting, literally bubonic plague-carrying rodents just move in waves, eat a bunch of seed that was going to be food for even vegans. You got to do something about that. What you do about it is shoot them a lot. So, is 22 mag good for that? Yeah, 22 mag is good for that. But here's why I don't have one anymore. I'm just going for mass shooting of prairie dogs. 22 long rifle is way cheaper. And 22 long rifle at reasonable ranges is plenty enough to kill prairie dogs. For sure. They're tiny little creatures, especially use hollow point ammunition. The issue with the 22 long rifle is not even that it really loses lethality at reasonable ranges, is that it is not as good at range. It has a worse trajectory. It doesn't buck the wind as well. 22 Magnum is better for that. Yeah, you can definitely hunt prairie dogs with 22 long rifle out at 200 yards, and it's a lot of fun. But you get more effectiveness out of a 22 Magnum. But here's the thing. You get way more effectiveness than that out of a 223. And so for me, 22 Magnum is kind of this middle ground that I don't really have much of a use for. Now, if I do a search on AmmoSeek, which is basically just a search engine for ammo, 22 long rifle, cheapest one that popped up, Normal, which is not even a bad brand, 2.6 cents per round. .22 Magnum is 20 cents per round. So you're talking you're talking 2 point something cents a round versus 20 cents a round. Do the math on that. If we're talking .223 Remington, we're talking 38 cents a round. So from 2 cents to 20 cents is an exponentially much greater cost, especially if we're talking about training. If we talk about 20 cents versus 38 cents, it's not going up by a factor of almost 10. It's going up by about double. You're getting a lot more lethality. Where if I can get close and kill a bunch of prairie dogs cheaply, I'll do it with .22 long rifle. And if I'm doing longer shots, and or I want to go coyote hunting, because a lot of times we're in the same place and I see a coyote, I get a lot more ballistic effect for a little bit more money. And we're talking about factory ammo. And here's the other big reason why I got rid of the .22 Magnum is that's factory ammo, right? I can't reload. Well, you can't. Technically, I know you can reload .22 long rifle and .22 Magnum. It is possible, but it's easy and common to reload center fire. So, I can likely reload .223 cheaper than I can get factory .22 Magnum. So what am I doing? The most expensive part of the ammo usually is the case, and I can reuse the case a lot on a .223, especially if I'm not loading it hot. I'm dealing with, again, a lot different technology we touched on earlier in bullet technology. I can use a varmint grenade. I can drop from there's probably later, but I remember loading 36 grain all the way up to 69, 77, 80 grain bullets. Talking a lot more flexible. And so for me, that kind of just fell into this no man's land of what am I doing here? I almost never shot that gun. Now, I just crapped on the .22 Magnum a little bit. Let me give it a redeeming quality. It is perhaps one of the top, if not the top, at least the top 2 rounds in power to weight ratio. Meaning the power you get for the weight of the ammo. .22 long rifle is real good. As we talked about, you get a lot more power out of a .22 Magnum, and you don't get a lot more weight, right? So we talk about that classic apocalypse scenario where you got to bug out on foot. You're talking about power to weight ratio. You get a lot more power to weight ratio if I have, let's say, 10 pounds allotted to ammo because I got to carry food and water filtration, and a knife and a compass and clothing and all the other stuff. Hopefully a spare pair of shoes and a bunch of extra socks. So I have, let's say, 10 pounds allotted for ammo. I got a lot more power to weight ratio with the .22 Mag than even the .22 long rifle. But again, we go to if I'm hunting for food, small game, I'm going to destroy a lot of it, which kind of defeats the purpose. But it does have a high power to weight ratio. If we are talking about that, the only real rival it has is a 5.7, which is a center fire round, which is going to be much more dependable just because it's a center fire. And we'll get into feeding issues maybe later on the .22 Magnum. It's likely going to be much more reliable, but it's also going to cost a lot more. So it's really the only one that gives it a run for the money as far as power to weight ratio, but not in cost. 5.7 is not cheap. But actually, it's not. It's not any more expensive than .223, which is surprising. I'm very surprised with that. It's really come a long way in the last couple of years. But it is quite a bit more expensive still than .22 Magnum. Okay, so let's talk about truck gun philosophy. Let's philosophize on truck guns. Now, I see survival guns bifurcated, split into 2 main categories: food and defense. Now, touch a little bit about food and hunting, small game hunting, varmint hunting, even deer hunting. Talked about headshots, which is, I assume, what they were talking about with the pig hunting that the patron mentioned. You're going to head shoot a pig? Yeah, I much more trust .22 Magnum, especially if you're talking about you live on a ranch and you have a bunch of pigs. And just like a poacher, you're looking at it over the course of years of feeding your family. Cost of the ammo versus the quantity and quality of meat. You're going to head shoot, so you get the most meat. And really, as long as you punch through the skull, it's done its job, and 22 mag is a good balance for that. Now, if we look at it for defense, okay, is 22 Magnum better than 22 long rifle? Yes. Would I rather have 22 long rifle than, I'm talking a decent 22 long rifle, like a Ruger 1022 set up properly, that I had tested and was reliable and was zeroed? Would I rather have that than a sharp stick in an encounter where I had to grab a truck gun? Yes, I would rather have it than a sharp stick. It would not be my go-to. It would not be my secondary. It wouldn't be my tertiary. But it would be better than nothing. And a 22 Magnum is better than that. So is 22 Magnum okay for defense? Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. That period. It is not great. It is not okay. It is not the equal of even the next one that I would consider, which would be 223. Again, it's not even the same. Not even the same sport. Yeah, somebody is trying to talk about that California migration. What about the mass illegal migration? What about drug cartels? What about all that stuff? You get into a gunfire exchange where bullets are flying both ways and you're shooting either out of your vehicle or into somebody else's vehicle, through a windshield, through a door, all that stuff, or just at extended ranges, which is what you want, because distance equals time and time equals opportunity in a gunfight. Right? There is no, in any circumstance, in any kind of vehicle firearm exchange where bullets are flying both ways, would I ever choose a 22 Magnum, even close to a 223. And again, 223 is not even my primary or secondary choice. Maybe my tertiary choice for this, 223. But it's way, way, way better than 22 Magnum. I wouldn't say 22 Magnum is like getting caught with your pants down, but it's not a good choice. So it's an okay round for defense. We talked about it in the hunting role. So what do I think about it for a truck gun? I would think about it for a truck guns. Right? I think you should have your CCW gun on you, period. I think you should have a shotgun in the truck for most places, because it's the most versatile. We talk about putting food on the table. We talk about stopping a vehicle, right? A Foster slug, a Bernanke slug, way better at that than even 223. We talk about into a vehicle, right? Double aught, triple aught, buck. It's not even close. So, and you probably get, I'm not even going to say probably, you can get, I think, a better, unless you just find some kind of crazy deal at a flea market or yard sale or something. He just wants to get rid of a 22 Magnum lever action or something. You're probably going to get a better repeatable rate of fire, more dependable pump action 12 gauge shotgun than you're going to get a 22 Magnum. So you're looking for truck gun. Obviously, if you've listened for any length of time, you know why would I recommend that over a 12 gauge? And if you're talking defense or hunting, the shotgun is way more versatile. You might make the case you want a rifle, and I would say yes. Again, I said truck guns. I usually keep multiple guns in the truck. Truck guns. Now, if it's not going to be a go-to for defense or anything like that, and you want it in your truck, I would say, okay, I got no problem with that. Now, we can what if and do scenarios. We've been doing that a lot, actually, on Patreon lately. But we can what if scenarios all day long. But just like the military, don't plan for the last war. The patron talked about that deer on the side of the road. Hey, I've been there. But here's the thing. You talked about you might get arrested if you discharge a firearm. If you discharge like a 223 or 308, but not a 22 Magnum. Here's the deal. I was a law enforcement officer. I'm not a lawyer, but I was a cop for a long time. I dealt with this kind of thing a lot. And I don't know of any jurisdiction where they say, okay, it's perfectly legal to discharge inside city limits or inside wherever this 22 Magnum, but not 223. I don't know that exists. I know it exists at like ranges, where ranges, like a range will say you're good up to this caliber because of our targets and our backstops. But I'm not aware of anywhere that's like, okay, well, a cop shows up, he's going to have a problem with it or he's not. He's going to be like, well, you shot it with a 22 mag, you're good to go. Oh, you shot it with a 308, you're going to prison. And you shot it with a firearm. If that's what you're worried about, I'd say carry a baseball bat, which I usually carry a blunt melee weapon in my vehicle anyway for other reasons. Talk about do the right tool for the job. If you're trying to put down an injured deer, depending on how injured it is, you just walk up to it and slit its throat. Or you hit it in the back of the head with an aluminum baseball bat or a breaker bar. If you're worried about the legality. Will it kill a deer if you shoot it in the head? Yeah. But in that scenario, I'm going to tell you, I think a .22 long rifle will do just as well. Because the deer is already, hopefully you're shooting it because it's so injured it's not going to live and you're doing it to put it out of its misery. In which case you should be able to walk up right behind it, not shooting it in the front of the skull, but shooting it in the base of the skull, right where the last vertebrae meets the top of the skull. If you do that, .22 long rifle will do fine. You could do that with an ice pick. Got to get close enough to do it. So in that scenario, I don't think that it's any better for that than a .22 long rifle. If you miss the first time, just do it again. With the .22 long rifle, the consequences are that deer should be wounded, so it's not like it's going to be running away. If you can put that gun right at the base of the skull where it meets the vertebrae, that's a pretty good ingress route for that bullet to go into the base of the skull, into the brainstem. So, but in general, if you're shooting a deer in the face to kill it, to put meat on the table, is the .22 Magnum better than a .22 long rifle? Yes. But if you're trying to put down a wounded animal and you are sneaking around behind it and put it in the brainstem, it doesn't make any difference, I don't think. So that's what I think about that, and I'm sorry to pee in your Cheerios, Delta, I appreciate you, but that's just my honest thoughts. Now, that being said, if you want a .22 Magnum lever gun or bolt gun as your truck gun, I'd say rock on. Do it. If you want a quieter gun, I would say that's a real advantage. Now, I did a whole episode on quiet without a suppressor. And here's kind of where I think the spectrum is .22 Magnum not out of a pistol, it's loud out of a pistol. .22 long rifle is loud out of a pistol. Is .22 Magnum out of a long-barreled gun quieter than a .223 or a .308? Yeah, it is quieter. But let me kind of go through a quick rundown. If you want real stealthy, real quiet, CB caps or Calibris or .22 long rifle subsonics out of a long-barreled, non-semi-auto .22 long rifle gun that will shoot those. A lot of .22 guns will also shoot .22 shorts, .22 CB caps, .22 Calibris, as long as you're not a semi-auto. If you're trying to be quiet, you don't want a semi-auto anyway because you don't want the sound of that action if you're talking about getting real quiet. And a lot of times those rounds won't cycle a semi-auto. But if you're talking about a lever action, a bolt action, .22 shorts that are slower than the speed of sound, when they leave that barrel, especially out of a long-barreled gun, the longer the better. .22 CB caps, Calibris, shorts, even standard long rifles in length that are subsonic velocity out of a long barrel. The longer the better. A 16-inch is long compared to a pistol, but 18, 20, 22 even better. That's going to be quiet. Quieter than the super tactile, uber cool Daniel Defense Mark 18 with a can on it. It's going to be quieter than that. You don't need a suppressor to be quiet. What's going to be also maybe as quiet or quieter is a heavy for caliber out of a carbine, out of a long barrel, not out of a handgun, but 30 heavy for caliber 38 special. Talking like 180 grain or even heavier subsonic 38 special out of a carbine, like a lever action carbine. And let me ask you this. Talking about that truck gun, you got one for defense. Do you want a lever action, .22 Magnum if you need it for defense? Or do you want a lever action 357 Magnum 38 special that you can shoot both out of, and you can shoot hot loaded 357 Magnums out of the same gun, and you can load it with the heavy 38 specials, and it's going to be quieter even than .22 Magnum, because we're talking about spectrum of quiet. Do the same thing with 44 and 44 special, 44 Magnum and 44 special out of a carbine, heavy for caliber subsonic. 44 special is crazy quiet out of a carbine, and way more powerful. Even the 38 special is way more powerful, but the 44 special, you're talking like a 300 plus grain load loaded subsonic out of a carbine, super quiet, crazy powerful, great penetrator. Right, that's all going to be quieter than a 22 Magnum. Now you get into your 22 Magnum. It's quieter, certainly quieter than a 223 out of an AR, a 308 out of a semi-auto. We're talking standard. But if you want to be quiet and you still wanted the 223, you could get something like a Mossberg MVP. It's a bolt action, kind of practical, kind of tactical. Takes AR magazines, but it's bolt action. And you could get and shoot subsonics out of that. Now, I haven't shot them side by side, but just from what I understand about physics and pressure, a lot of the crack that you get from the rifle is the sonic boom. That bullet going transonic, meaning breaking that sound barrier, which is not exactly, it depends on humidity and elevation and a bunch of things, but just for easy numbers, let's say 1,000 feet a second. When it transcends that, you get noise. Which is why, going back to that Daniel Defense Mark 18, this ain't Hollywood. They're shooting blanks. You're actually shooting a physical projectile going transonic, you make noise. That Daniel Defense with a can is quieter than without a can, but it's not quiet. Not even kind of quiet. It's loud. You're still supposed to wear hearing protection. It's so loud. That 22 Magnum is still loud. Not as loud as a 223. You're dealing with less pressure, but going back to if you wanted a decent thing, you might consider, if you're in this realm, getting a 223, and if you just wanted to shoot a couple of rounds quiet at close distance, because your point of aim, point of impact is not going to be the same. If you're talking taking out a wounded animal at feet versus yards, it's going to be academic. You could shoot subsonic, heavy for caliber, subsonic. And again, I haven't shot them side by side, but as far as I understand physics and with my shooting experience, I would think out of a rifle length barrel, a subsonic 223 would be quieter than a supersonic 22 Magnum. And it's going to be heavier. It's going to have more energy and still be quieter. You could keep it loaded most of the time with whatever your truck gun defensive load you wanted. Which is going to be, again, way, way more effective and more powerful than 223. And you could have the potential to have it be quieter, even without a suppressor, than 22 Magnum. So those are some thoughts, and this is outside the scope of the question, but I want to touch on this because people listening to this might be interested in 22 Magnum out of a handgun and out of a semi-auto rifle. Here's the thing. Rim fires are inherently not as reliable as center fires, right? If they were, a lot of the early metallic cartridges were rim fires. We would have just stayed with rim fire. But center fire rounds are generally more reliable than rimfire rounds. You could maybe find some that's not the case, like the garbage cheapest Tula ammo, and the most expensive Olympic 22 long rifle ammo, and maybe that's not the case. But in vast majority of cases, center fire is more reliable than rimfire. So you get that issue if you're talking about defense. Also, if you're talking about semi-auto with a 22 Magnum, there are some other things that lend to it not being as reliable even than 22 long rifle. It's got a long, thin, straight-walled case that's tiny, which is kind of like the worst thing that you want for feeding as far as common rounds go. You talk about a round that's known for being reliable, like the AK-47, the 7.62 by 39. It's like the opposite of that, right? It's a big, big tapered round with a bottleneck. As long as you break that seal a little bit, you've pretty much released all the internal friction from that round and the chamber, if you think about that. Think about the 22 Magnum, it's a thin case, so it's going to expand when you shoot it, and it's still going to have some kind of friction all the way until that case completely exits that chamber. And it's a long case. And you're not dealing with a lot of power, especially compared to most center fire rounds. So, can it work in a semi-auto, either handgun or rifle? It can. But it is a fickle cartridge to get it to work like that. That being said, I'm not saying it's bad to have it in a semi-auto. Again, what's the consequence? If you're talking about prairie dog hunting and you have a malfunction, even if it gets stuck in the chamber, which is not uncommon for rimfires, and I got to take my Leatherman, the consequence is I missed the opportunity at 2 or 3 prairie dogs, maybe. Not a big deal. If it's a defensive encounter and somebody is trying to kill me and that empty case gets stuck in the chamber, right? That could potentially, literally be life-changing. So you have that issue with 22 Magnum. That's any gun can malfunction, but just by the nature of the dimensions of that cartridge, it does not lend itself well to that. Again, we get into that realm. If it's for defense and you want kind of the ballistic characteristics, you may look at the 5.7. Also, if we talk about it in a handgun, you are not getting those kind of velocities out of a handgun. You're getting far less velocity out of a handgun than a rifle with 22 Magnum. That said, you're still getting quite a bit more velocity than 22 long rifle. If you were going to do this, if you're going to go down this route, I would recommend the 22 Magnum in a revolver if you're going to carry it for defense. Because, let's say, for most common malfunctions, the round fails to fire or gets stuck in the chamber. With a revolver, you just pull the trigger again. It puts a fresh cylinder, meaning a fresh round, in the firing sequence. I pull the trigger, click, no bang, I just pull the trigger again. That's one of the big advantages of a revolver in that type of malfunction, type 1 malfunction. And that's an advantage in a center fire like a 38 Special as well, but it's a big advantage here because it's more likely to happen. Also, the other one we talked about where it gets stuck in the chamber, well, you're not even trying to pull it out of the chamber. So even if it did get stuck in the chamber, depending on your gun, let's say you got 5 more chances before you even have to worry about getting that round out of the chamber because you have multiple chambers. And even if you had to reload, you could probably deal with it then. You got a lot more chances. It's not like the round and it gets stuck in your chamber. You have whatever. A lot of these have even more than 6 chambers, but let's say 6 chambers. So you got 5 more chances. Or 5 other chances, depending on what in the sequence number this was. But you get the idea. If you were thinking about 22 Magnum for defense in a handgun, I would recommend a revolver. I'm not saying always. I'm not saying that a revolver is a better carry gun than a semi-auto. You probably know that if you listen, but if this is the first time you've listened, I'm not recommending that in general carte blanche. I'm recommending that in this specific circumstance, if you're going to carry a 22 Magnum handgun, I would probably recommend, for a lot of reasons, feeding, malfunctions, you carry it in a revolver over a semi-auto and a handgun. Those are some thoughts. This is a long episode. I guess there's a lot more to the 22 Magnum, I think, because there's so many misconceptions on it. Is it a great caliber? Yeah. Is it a great varmint hunting caliber? Yeah. Would it be a good truck guns battery? Yes. And I would not fault anybody for having a 22 Magnum lever action or bolt action kicking around in their truck as an option for a truck gun. Is it much more powerful than a 22 long rifle? Yes. Is it almost as powerful as a 223? No, it is not even close. It's not even anywhere near 223, 5.56. Not even close. For a lot of reasons. Not in dependability, not in reliability, and certainly not in power. One thing we didn't discuss, if you reload, this makes sense. If you don't reload, it doesn't make a lot of sense. 22 Hornet. 22 Hornet, unless there's some wildcat I'm not aware of, 22 Hornet is the least powerful center fire. And it's much less powerful than 223, but still much more powerful than 22 Magnum. So that jump you get from 22 long rifle to 22 Magnum, it's substantial. You get another substantial increase when you go from 22 Magnum to 22 Hornet. Now, 22 Hornet, I'd say if you hand load. If you don't hand load, I don't really recommend it unless you just want one. But if you're going to buy centerfire ammo, you can likely get cheaper 223, which is much more powerful. But if you hand load, you can reload those cases. You're going to use less powder. And if you want to go the quiet route, you could do that same thing and reload some quiet 22 Hornets. And you could do a lot of specialty stuff because you're talking about different bullet technology. You're talking about the same bullet technology that you would use in a classic centerfire. Proper jacketed bullets, not just copper washed. You could do things like frangible bullets, powdered metallurgy. If you care about ricochets and stuff, we did talk about like Suburban stuff. If you're worried about ricochets in suburban environments, especially where you have a lot of rocks and stuff in the soil, use a frangible. And you can do that with a 22 Hornet or a 223. Probably actually safer to use a frangible 223 or 22 Hornet than a solid 22 Magnum. I'm talking about frangible. I'm not talking about segmented. I know you can get segmented bullets, which is a different thing. In rimfire, I'm talking about powdered metallurgy. And you can go quiet. You can load them pretty hot. Again, not in the same ballpark as a 223, but it's kind of this forgotten thing. And we go back to that survival. You talk about it's going to be even better than a 22 Magnum if you're talking about shooting deer. It's going to be better at punching through a skull than a 22 Magnum. And I can load it down. Now, you can't do this with all rounds. You can't just, we talked about shooting quiet. If you don't know what you're doing, this can really hurt you, so don't do this. But you can find published actual data. You can load down some powders, and I can really load down if I'm talking about a manually operated gun. Not an AR, because I have to cycle the action. But we go back to like that Mossberg MVP or a Savage Axis, which is a real affordable bolt-action 223. I can load it down and make it really quiet with something like Trail Boss. I can do the same thing with 22 Hornet. I can load it down really far in 22 Hornet, the right bullets, and I can shoot those small game animals like a quail and still eat them and not do a lot of meat damage. If I possess the knowledge of bullet construction and velocity, if I'm talking about a manually operated manual transmission rifle, a bolt action, a lever action, I can load that way down and the gun will work just fine. I won't do the kind of damage that I would do with a 22 Magnum. But again, that's kind of a hand loader's proposition, and I realize that a lot of people do not hand load. But I thought I would throw that in there at the end. It's been a long episode, guys. It's a lot. I guess the 22 Magnum is a deeper topic than I thought. The patrons will get this early because it's a long episode and because it was a Patreon question, and they'll get it without commercials. Patrons get a lot of cool insider content. Recently, we've been talking about less lethal shotgun ammo. Where does it fall? Might be in the camp of that's garbage, hippie, Birkenstock wearing ammo, not suitable for anything. You might think, yeah, it's a good idea to have in some kind of civil unrest scenario where maybe you want to dissuade somebody but you don't want to kill them. Where is it on the spectrum? We've been talking about that. We've been talking about just a fun thing about what guns are so bad you'd rather have a knife, which may be its own fun episode in the future, but we've been talking about that in the chat. Just an example of things just recently popped up today in the chat. Like, what guns are so bad, like, that you would rather have a good EDC knife? Like, would you rather have a Raven 25 auto or a good EDC knife in a, let's say, urban, suburban fight to the death? Would you rather have a good EDC knife? Whatever yours is, a Benchmade Infidel or a White River Firecraft or whatever your go-to EDC knife is. Would you rather have that or a Raven 25 auto for defense, not for obviously I think you should have both. It's just a fun thing we're talking about. That's just an example. And again, they get a lot of insider content that you're just not going to get. So if you want to become a patron, you want to support the show, there should be a Patreon link in the show notes. If you appreciate me not just taking bribes like a lot of other channels, to be honest, and saying, this new thing came out by X company and they're paying me, so you should buy it, you should have it. You don't get that here. And if you want to help keep that going, consider becoming a patron. All right, with that, your tactical tip of the day. Tactical tip of the day, talking about putting food on the table in a suburban environment quietly. If you're in one place, if you're not bugging out, trapping. And this is something I did when I lived in an, I would say, urban environment. Some people might have called it suburban. Trapping. Especially snaring. Now, snaring is a really good skill to have. It's also very difficult. If you're literally just trying to trap animals, it's not the easiest. It's more challenging, right? Get a Conibear 110 or whatever is appropriate for your size of game. I've been a professional trapper, if I didn't mention it in the bio. But if you're trying to trap for a living, for fur, you're literally trying to survive on it, and you're going to stay in one place, you're not carrying everything, get a traditional trap. Get like a Conibear. This is my preferred go-to trap, has been since I was a boy. But if you just want to have the skill and be able to put food on the table minimally, which even when I was the commander of a tactical team, which you might surmise meant I was in a big metropolitan area, I still wanted to be able to put meat on the table for my family without just going to the grocery store and buying something wrapped in cellophane. Snares. If the thing you are snaring has teeth, then use metal wire. Go to Dollar Tree, get picture frame wire. Didn't catch an animal, it's probably not because you didn't go to some survival website and get the Gucci snare wire. It's probably because you didn't know what you were doing. That picture frame wire is cheap. It's readily available. If you're trapping something with teeth, you want metal wire. Quick caveat, be ethical. You should check your traps often. Do not just set a metal snare and then catch an animal and leave it there for days. That is messed up. You should never ever want an animal to starve to death. You should never ever cause an animal to starve to death by catching it in your trap and leaving it, or leaving it to die of dehydration or anything like that. So, if you use the snare properly, it should catch it, depending on what you're trying to trap, by the head and kill it quickly, but it doesn't always. So you should monitor that. That being said, if you are trapping something without teeth, especially birds, which is one of my favorite things to trap because I like to eat them, trapping birds, you don't need metal wire because they don't have teeth and they don't generally chew through. They don't even try, that I've noticed. So one really good thing for that's cheap is kite string. You don't want big string as much as people like, you need 550 cord for survival, right? You don't want 550 cord for this. You want thin, light string. Depending on the size of your quarry, if it's a real small bird, you could use dental floss. Small, it's light, it's cheap, but kite string tends to work pretty well, and it's super cheap if you can find it. And making snares, you can get a lot of kite string for a little bit of money. Also use fishing string if you want to use that monofilament. It's just kind of harder to work with, a little too springy for me. I prefer kite string. You can literally take a stick, even in the biggest, unless you're talking about downtown Manhattan, you can probably find a stick. Or you can probably just find something to tie it to. But you take a stick. You should know your knots. You should tie a good bowline knot, make it into a slip knot, do a hitch on the stick, shove it in the ground, and make said snares. You can make several on the same stick, because they're probably not all going to catch a bird. Make 3 or 4 and like a clover leaf around the stick and put it where birds normally, if you know a place where birds normally land in your environment, just put it there. If you want to and you want to increase your chances, whatever the birds are going to eat. You got some bread scraps, you got some bread crumbs, you got some stale crackers, save those. Doesn't take very much. And there you go. Good way to put food on the table in an urban suburban environment. Anyway, with that, your tactical verse of the day. Tactical verse of the day. For though we walk in the flesh, we do not war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty in God for pulling down strongholds, casting down arguments and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, bringing every thought into captivity to the obedience of Christ. Now remember, our primary thing here, there are enemies that will try and kill your flesh, but you're in a spiritual war. Do not forget that. Evil thoughts are a real thing that we have to combat in this world. What does this verse say? Bring every thought captive to the obedience. Or every thought into captivity, rather, to the obedience of Christ. When you're having bad thoughts, when you're struggling, don't run away from God in shame. He already knows. He knows all thoughts and intents of the heart. Run to Him. Bring it to Christ. Lay it at Christ. He is seated at the right hand of the Father. Lay it down. Submit it to Him. Say, I'm struggling with this. Help me. He died to set you free. Bring those thoughts into captivity to Christ. I don't know what you're going through, but I know it's always the right answer to go to God. In the midst of whatever you're struggling with, in the midst of depravity, in the midst of your greatest triumph and your greatest defeat, it's always the right answer to go to God. It's never the wrong answer. So what should you do? Go to God. Go to Christ. He died for you. Live for Him. Thanks for listening. Have a blessed day.